Can y'all just look at this? A whole fashion week all digital. So is this what they have been preparing us for all this time with the pandemic and the shutdown and all that? They were getting ready for us to be stuck in the house because everything is about to go digital. Can y'all just look at this?
She's an icon, she's a legend, and she is the moment. Now come on now.
What's up, icons? It's the iconic fashion figure, and I just experienced a full digital fashion week. First time I've ever experienced anything like that. And if you've seen previous Trending Tuesday videos, which I do every month, so this is for the month of March, you know we've talked about NFTs and what that is and how that's infiltrating the fashion industry, and you know, what can you do with NFTs in fashion? Well, the Metaverse just did an entire fashion week all digital. So like that clip you just saw at the beginning, that was one of the Runway shows. I'll run it through again so you guys can see more of that fashion show because I only showed you a little snippet of it. But that was one of many runway shows that they did during their fashion week in the Metaverse. There were a bunch of other runway shows as well, and some people did like exhibits where you can just see the product. Wasn't necessarily a runway, but for example, another runway show was like the Dolce and Gabbana one. I'll show that one to you guys really quickly as well. And then I'll just throw in a few other snippets from the Metaverse Fashion Week. Now, the entire fashion week wasn't just runway shows and exhibits and all that stuff. There were actual panels that were available too, where you can listen to people talking about the direction the fashion industry is going in, digital fashion and all of that stuff. There was a lot going on in this fashion week. It was literally like a real fashion week. The same things you would experience in person, it was all done in the Metaverse. So I'll throw in one of the panels that I did watch that I feel would be great for Trending Tuesday, because it's talking about digital fashion and where that's headed, and you know, where people are seeing this going next, how they feel about it right now. So I'll throw that in. It's like a 40-minute panel, like 40 minutes to an hour. So I'll throw that in so you guys can check that out.
They want, and you definitely facilitate that through the Fabricant and a lot through what you're doing now. So hopefully we'll get to what's going on right now as well. But Amber, would you like to kick off, introduce yourself a little bit and tell people about how you started in virtual fashion and the Fabricant?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thank you so much for having me, David. I'm really happy to be here with all of you. I think the journey really started quite a long time ago when I was still in school. I was studying traditional fashion design, learning how to do things, everything the traditional way. But I always felt like something was missing because we were living our lives more digital, every single day. And I remember my friends, that's when just Instagrams just started coming up around the time when I was studying, and my friends were posting things on Instagram, and there was this really big splurge and moving more towards this digital space. And as a kid, I was a gamer as well, so I was used to moving myself in digital spaces, and I loved the idea that you could shift identities. So I started playing around with 3D software because I thought it was at least better to create things digitally than in the physical world, for the planet, but also for experimentation with what identity can mean in the future. And I just thought that the technology is just so terribly exciting when you don't have any limitations holding you back from creating whatever you would like to create. So I graduated with a digital collection, even though all of my teachers advised against it and called me absolutely insane. And I'm still very happy that I was able to graduate. But yeah, it was ever since then it's been this interesting journey where it's always been the question like, oh yeah, do you really think it's going to happen? Like, so little people believed that this was actually going to be a thing, and luckily we gathered a few people around to start the Fabricant in 2018, which was amazing. So together with Carrie, I started it, and then more and more people joined, like our co-founder Adriana. And it just started to grow and grow, and now it's become this huge movement. We decided also to really share resources, team up with all the people that were in the space, like really try and find like-minded souls to change things in the industry. And for me, it's incredible to see now that so many brands are interested, because in the first place, a couple of years ago, we had to convince people that this was going to happen, and really trying to get them to join us into this crazy world which is called digital fashion. But right now it's just become like this term that everybody understands and knows why it's necessary, because, well, also the pandemic, but also because our lives are becoming more digital. So I think we've seen massive, really beautiful developments, and I can't wait to see where the space is going, because if it develops at this pace, it's going to be absolutely crazy next year and the year after, and I don't really know where it's going to go. So that really excites me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, Amber. Such a big fan of yours, and love the journey that you've had in this space, and looking forward to delving into some more of the ethos of the Fabricant, all of the work that you create, your ideas of co-creation, and I'm sure we're going to delve into some of these thoughts in a little bit more depth in this conversation, so definitely looking forward to that. Up next, I'd like to introduce Brian Trunzo from Polygon Studios. Brian is somebody that we've had on some of other chats this week, and has had some great thoughts that he's shared, and would love to bring you into this conversation, and especially to contextualize your experience with fashion, because obviously you come from the traditional fashion industry. You've now come into the Web3 space, working at Polygon with a whole bunch of other brands. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on kind of that entry point into virtual fashion, and how that's been for you, and how you've experienced virtual fashion really become a thing over the past decade or so.
Yeah, thanks for that, David. Brian Trunzo, Polygon Studios being the investment, advisory, and biz dev arm of Polygon, the blockchain upon which many decentralized applications are built, one of which is Decentraland, so love having them built on our rails, of course. So a little bit about myself. Yes, I come from the traditional fashion business, having owned and operated stores and brands in New York. I exited those businesses a few years back, and I found myself on the trend forecasting circuit. That's to say, telling multinational large corporates what the kids are doing. And around that time, I had crypto pilled myself pretty heavily, and found myself just absolutely enamored with the emerging ERC 721 contract, of course, which would become the standard for what we know today as NFTs. And I started slipping into my presentations images of cats, right, like crypto kitties. And I would have those images next to images of Lil Miquela. Shout out to Brud and Dapper Labs and all the great work that they had done with Lil Miquela. And then next to that, maybe like Decentraland, actually, because late 2017, it was already a thing, it was happening, right? And even Axie was in development at that time. Maybe it was early 2018. And it was my way of trying to explain to some of these contemporary brands, and in some instances even luxury brands, because some of the slides would also contain cosmetics. That's to say, in-game items that had no sort of had no effect on actual gameplay, right? So like skins within Fortnite, League of Legends, Louis Vuitton had already done collaborations. I would make this slide in such a way to try to explain that this concept of digital scarcity was coming, that it was important, and that it would eventually create an economy digitally that would dwarf the sort of the real world apparel economy, which is over $2 trillion of a year in revenue. And I was met with, I want to say, mixed response. There were some dreamers in the room who would resonate to it, but it wasn't a mixed response. It was usually laughter or sort of like snarky remarks. Oh, this is not going to happen. And over the course of 5 to 6 years, eventually it did and is happening, right? And here we are today. So, a big role of mine at Polygon Studios is working with legacy, real world, world-class IP Prada and Adidas have collaborated on chain, D&G, Macy's, and the list goes on, of developing strategies and implementing them on chain, such that they do not step into Web3 so that they step into Web3 with their best foot forward, right? I mean, we've seen some sort of lazy, low effort, vapid attempts by some to get into Web3, and it's our goal at Polygon Studios to make sure that's not the case for our partners.
Awesome. So happy to have you here, Brian, and looking forward to delving in a little bit deeper on some of the early days of the NFT space, and of course, Decentraland was right along there with all that. So really excited to delve deeper and chat about that a little more. Happy to have you here. Last but certainly not least, Adriana from the Dematerialized would love to put some context into how Dematerialized fits into the space. Obviously, another what we could call a legacy brand in this very new burgeoning Web3 space. Definitely, really integral to a whole bunch of Web3 and traditional brands and their journey into this space. Would love to hear some thoughts from you on how all of this has emerged, and also maybe if you want to give us a little bit of a history of DMAT.
I can relate to Amber on almost a spiritual level of kind of being addicted to The Sims as a kid, and really kind of having a pink Game Boy and dressing my Barbie, and having that kind of addictive, almost gaming and gamifying fashion mindset from a really young age. So I think my entryway into kind of the digital fashion sphere came from I actually have a footwear background, traditional kind of footwear making. And got into kind of the digital side, working both kind of in-house and on for different kind of agencies, working in both the kind of fashion and technology side, and stumbled across DMAT after having I actually worked very closely with Corinna Grant, who's one of the founders, a few years prior, and essentially I was one of the early beta testers on the platform in DMAT when they launched back in December of 2020. So I remember, Corinna and Marjorie Hernandez getting together really to try and build kind of a destination for digital fashion. And I think, since the launch of DMAT being kind of that first digital fashion marketplace for fashion NFTs back in 2020, they've really kind of built, almost like you say, a legacy in this space for working with physical first brands, things like Virtue Worldwide and Vice Media, and we're on the almost kind of like cultural shaping side with Vogue Talents and also kind of smaller studios like Roberts Wood, as well as kind of curtailing or working with kind of digital first brands as well, from the likes of Tribute Brand, Teflon Sega, and Artifact way back one as well. From our perspective, what we're really trying to do is really kind of change the face of what it means to own digital fashion and be able to kind of transport that into different environments, and be able to use that as a means of kind of curating communities both in IRL and in URL. Currently we kind of integrate into Zepeto, Roblox, IMVU, Sansar, Decentraland, Snapchat, and Instagram as well. So in a nutshell, what we're really trying to do is kind of curate new aesthetics and forms of culture, very complementary to, I guess, what Amber and Brian are doing as well.
Awesome. Super exciting, and great to add some context into how different brands in the space fit in. And of course, I think you've been really instrumental to a lot of folks' journeys, especially some pretty large companies entering the space. So really happy to have you here as well, Adriana, and looking forward to delving in a little bit deeper in this conversation. So in order to do that, like I said, I'd love to take a step back and kind of discuss some of the early days of virtual fashion and consider, what I'd call like the ramp on chain, the kind of multi-year journey where we went from like the concept of virtual fashion, digital spaces going from the real world to IMVU to, all these online spaces that existed, even to video games. You could include any video game pretty much in that. I've heard people, one of our panelists this week was mentioning how she took inspiration from the GTA strippers, and that was like a whole the GTA strippers and the GTA streetwalkers. It was like a whole reference point for her and her fashion. I'm like, I love that, because it comes from just the idea of digitizing fashion, and then of course moving that on chain through solutions like Decentraland and others, the idea of NFTing a piece of virtual fashion, or even just selling something on chain. These are all kind of thoughts that have been developed over the past few years, even conceptually since 2014, but more realistically, since 2017, 2018, when Amber and very few other people were kind of, experimenting with these ideas. And, there's always a few brands that kind of come out, of course, the Fabricant, DressX, Ouroboros, the Dematerialized, Tribute Brand, Replicant Fashion, but there's really a short list. Artifact, of course, but it's a super short list. And there are a lot of designers that have come out, and there's a lot of people who have been championed and have created beautiful looks. But actually creating a brand around virtual fashion is super difficult, because it's not just one look. It's creating a sustainable business model of any kind around something that up till very recently didn't really exist for any kind of market. It must have been, and I'm sure was a challenge. And I'd love to delve into some of those early days. And obviously you are the pioneers and the people who've stuck with it till now. And now this is the rage, and it's super successful. And you see brands of all sizes really pushing to enter the space and clamoring. And I'm sure everybody's inbox in this call is absolutely full with brands trying to enter the metaverse, whatever that means. But let's take a few steps back. And Amber, I'd love to hear from you some of your thoughts on the early days of trying to sell wearables as a business model, and also the idea of trying to bring fashion on chain. Would love to hear maybe some of your earliest memories in those senses.
Yeah, I love that. I also love these references to video games, right? Because that's really where it all started. And I think, in a way, like, this is what really inspired me as a kid, like moving into these digital spaces. Like, that is just extremely inspiring, coming from being in the real world, kind of born in the real world, but growing up into the digital world more and more. And I think that is really what really inspired me. I read this story lately about this trans woman who actually programmed different genders in a video game already back in the 90s, which is incredible, because before that there was just one gender, which was male. But she actually programmed in 4 different genders, which was really, really cool for that time already. So I think, there's many things that is left unexplored within this space. But the kind of history from this end is really, for us as the Fabricant itself, I think we started out with really putting out this digital collection into the world, which is what we did in 2018. It was this big guess. We put a lot of our work into it. I designed a collection, and Carrie kind of did the whole visualization, and we put that out into the world. And these images are still circling the internet, which is crazy. It's still being played in museums, and because it was a really iconic moment where we basically said, do you still need a fashion show when you're able to create this level of images and this level of visualizations? Because a lot of people wouldn't believe that it was digital. And I think that's kind of the line we always like to play as the Fabricant is it real or is it not real? And we make it so realistic, but yet play with the fantasy ideas or the fantasy elements to it. Not that it goes too far out that you don't understand it anymore, but it's like this delicate balance between realism and surrealism, and that's kind of where we love to play the line. And so we did this collection. We put that out for free online on our website so people can download and learn from it, which was also this massive, fashion brands would never do that because it's IP and you can sell it, so why would you do that? So it was also a massive guess, but it really did help the sort of community go forward, and that was really cool. And then basically next to that, we were always servicing brands to create campaigns and work with them and try to really create this new industry by taking them along. And that was our income, let's say. But slowly the market started being more ready for digital only goods, and we always thought this would happen, so that was always in the back of our minds to basically be able to sell digital clothing at some point. But back then the market was first not really ready for it, and then slowly it started transitioning, and more brands started to come on board. And it also really helped in 2019 when we sold that first digital only dress on the blockchain, which was this massive moment in history at an Ethereum conference, where we sold this dress for 54 ETH. Well, back then it was for $9,500, but 54 ETH, still quite a lot of money. And this marked the spot in the history of fashion, because all the brands were like, are you serious? Like, are people paying money for a garment that doesn't exist? Like, so many reactions from people, like, stop the press, like, what does this world come to? Can we please stop? Like, oh my God. And I think this moment really was this moment where people started seeing, oh, there's value in digital items, and it gets more valuable over time. And that's the moment when we decided, yeah, of course, our whole business should be on chain, and all the things moving forward should be on chain, and everything that we do, even though it's free, even though it's downloadable, it should be having some kind of recognition and some kind of link to the chain, let's say. And
what year was that? Sorry, I don't want to interrupt because I love the story.
Yeah, 2019. So that was in, I think, May 2019. It was pretty crazy. And then it was together with Dapper Labs, of course, the creators of CryptoKitties. So we did that together with them. It was the year after CryptoKitties was sold there in the Ethereum conference. And yeah, this year they did a digital only dress. And I remember that time. It was really crazy, and we didn't really expect what would happen. But yeah, we dressed Johanna Jaskowska, which was a really cool influencer with all this sort of face filters on Instagram. And afterwards, we decided to create a platform which could host all of these digital garments, but could also become this co-creation place where everybody could create digital garments together. And that became the Fabricant Studio, but I can explain more about that later as well.
Amazing, and hopefully that gives people some context, and I love when we talk about, the history of this space, and, even when I might do a lecture at a university or something about the history of NFTs, we're talking about very few years ago. The history of the space really begins in, 2014 is the beginning of the Ethereum network, right? 2017 is really early days. I think you can maybe find like a tokenized something or other from 2014, maybe 2015, but really before that didn't exist. And I think that's really exciting. When we can look at the past, but that's a pretty recent past. I think that can really inspire us to what's possible in the very near future, especially now that adoption's happening and more people are coming into this space. If we've done this much in this short period of time, what could we possibly do in the next year, let alone 5 or 10 years? So looking forward to delving into the now and the future with you a little bit more, and talk a little bit more about the Fabricant Studios. But so happy to have you here, Amber, and it's an absolute pleasure. Brian, would love to go to you next. And as we're talking about some of these early days of the blockchain, you were definitely around, as you said, OG CryptoKitties. Amber was collaborating with Dapper Labs, and you were definitely all in on the Dapper Labs even back then. So I'd love to discuss some of these early days, and some of the ideas around digital identity, and what were some of your thoughts when you were thinking of buying an NFT back when nobody else was? What really attracted you to something like some of these PFP projects like CryptoKitties, or some of these other concepts around identity in the early days of on-chain ownership?
Yeah, for me it was so obvious. Like I didn't have to emerge towards this concept or like figure it out over time. I had like a moment where it just made complete sense, and I was almost embarrassed that I had been hesitant and resistant towards crypto generally up until that point, when I had learned about CryptoKitties and what these ERC 721s could do. So that's a little bit of background. It was like almost like, it's corny to say, and everyone has interesting origin stories, but for me it was like akin to a religious experience. Like it was like this come to Jesus moment. Like, wow, this is what I've been looking for. And what was it, this thing, right? It was this way to self-actualize and self-express digitally in a way that was never possible before, because prior to that moment in time, anything that you had quote unquote owned digitally, you didn't own. It was just a license to use, right? And we discussed that on the last panel, David. But what's even more interesting about this for me is how there's a thread line, and how some of the greatest brands in the world do this, either consciously or subconsciously. Some of the greatest products in the world do this. There's this thread line between what I had just said, self-actualization, and vanity. Right, you saw this with Web 2, with social media, right? The vanity side, the clout chasing side, the look at what I'm doing, the consumption part, right? That's there, right? We all know that's there with NFTs, and that was there and is still there with Instagram and Twitter. It's look at me, look at what I'm doing, the vanity side. But it also encourages one towards self-actualization, right? It encourages one thinking about Web 2 to travel more so that you can post your vanity, right? To discover more products, to discover more culture. So it's this delicate balance between the two, this concept of people finding their voice in personal brands. And with digital ownership and with NFTs and with crypto even more generally, it's just that turbocharged, right? And one can only begin to imagine, and I'm sure Adriana and Amber have done this imagining, as I often do myself, of where this can go, right? And that's some of the fun and most fun parts of this, is that there's no wrong answer of where this could go. And for as cliche as this sounds, the only limitation is indeed our imaginations. And the last point I'd like to make here is how, for anyone who works in this industry or who engages with NFTs and crypto, again, more generally, will tell you and know it's dog years. This stuff is moving so fast. I often say that 1 year in Web3 is like 10 years, in the 80s and 90s, maybe even the early aughts. I mean, it's just moving at a blazing speed. I remember when I was a teenager and AOL, so I guess I'm dating myself, and AOL was, the leader in sort of the World Wide Web, the internet versus intranet battle. One could get to the end of AOL at the end of the day and like, oh, I got to the end of the internet. There's nothing left to consume. I'm here. Like, I'll check in again tomorrow. And I feel like that was the case up until NFTs with crypto. Like you could get to the end of crypto for the day. You kind of know everything that's happening in DeFi, what's happening with the infrastructure plays, social good, DAOs, social tokens, etc. And then, NFTs burst onto the scene, and that just was no longer the case. Yeah.
And here we are now. No, amazing. Thanks so much for that, Brian. And looking forward to delving a little bit more about how that transitioned into where we are now again, and where that's gonna look like in, and again, 1 year, let alone 5 years, because the growth is really exponential. And I brought this up in a couple different talks, but I think the idea of hypermodernity is always very relevant to any of these topics, because we're progressing at a rate that's difficult for most people to understand. So I think it's important for us to kind of double down on the topics that we are passionate about, and just really focus on those, because so much is going to change every year, let alone every month. Especially people like Amber, for instance, who have really doubled down on a very specific asset of Web3 or a specific corner of Web3. I think have been quite successful, because you saw the virtual fashion future and you stuck with it. Brian, similar, you saw the future of NFTs and this idea of virtual ownership, and you stuck with it. And I think there's definitely a similar narrative that you could spin around DMAT as well. I'm sure the idea of coming off of some of Marjorie's work, with Luxo, and then simultaneously, building virtual fashion through DMAT. I think there's definitely another story here, and I'd love to once again rewind and pass the mic over to Adriana and take us back to even if you would, just at the beginning of DMAT in 2020, and what was going on at that time for everybody. Obviously, fall of 2020 was a period of mass realization for many people in terms of NFTs, the blockchain, what all of this meant. A lot of people had aped in over COVID in some way, shape, or form. They've either bought crypto and had some success, or bought an NFT and had some success. Still a very niche population, but I think that fall of 2020 was a really pivotal time. So just taking us back to then, and the dawn of DMAT, as one could say. Do you want to give us a little bit of context and let us know about how this was all built and how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I think there's probably 2 points in which I would start to compare kind of the then and the now. And I think, the first one is really thinking about the price that people were willing to pay at that point for virtual fashion. I know Amber kind of, touched on this a little bit around kind of the general appetite. And from DMAT's perspective, we can kind of evidence this from a price point perspective. And, looking at some of our first drops with the Fabricant and with Artifact, and thinking about, the price of how those items were actually kind of unveiled to the market, thinking, 10 euros, 15 euros, and, really kind of posing that question of how much would you pay for this? And almost, it wasn't, and it still very much isn't, but, an exercise around almost tempting that curiosity, much more so than thinking about kind of, achieving a sale. But at the same time, now, by comparison, we're selling items for 10,000 euros. And I think this has nothing to do with the price. It's about the maturity of, the actual industry, and how, digital craftsmanship has come to light, how the idea of, wearing and ultimately owning digital fashion and being able to take that into different environments is obviously evidenced within kind of the first pieces that we had, were just almost kind of like two-dimensional, almost like art pieces, and they're so beautiful, and they are really like genuine kind of artifacts of that time, whereas now you're starting to see this real utility being able to port into different environments. And I mean, we're not at kind of seamless interoperability yet, but like I said, I think, as evidence from our metaverse partnerships now, being able to kind of take your DMAT garment from Zepeto into Decentraland and back into Roblox is a really interesting thing. And the second point I was going to say, and kind of comparing then and now, is in that kind of aesthetic as well. And I think DMAT has always been a kind of champion as promoting that hyper realistic style. And I think from the very beginning, that was something that Corinna and Marjorie really kind of wanted to promote, is having that kind of super high quality aesthetic, but obviously, like we said, maybe playing with that and kind of how that actually then transforms into different environments. But I think on top of that, it wasn't necessarily that hyper real aesthetic, it was also that almost kind of like everyone's first impression of what digital fashion would look like was super cyber looking. And I think, and again, an evidence of how far we've come is look at now the types of aesthetics that we have in virtual fashion. We have things like, the J.W. Anderson sweater was a perfect demonstration of how digital knitwear can be, you wouldn't even know it's fake. And I think, we just did a launch with Rebecca Minkoff where, these assets are so high quality that honestly, if you showed it to me right now, I wouldn't know whether or not it was real or fake. And I think, again, comparing that kind of price point to then and now, comparing that aesthetic from then and now, and, to Brian's point, really creativity is the limit here in terms of, where this goes and how far it can be pushed. So I guess to try and kind of summarize, how we are actually building a brand for ourselves within that kind of entire space, I think DMAT is really fortunate that, we have almost kind of that consistency in aesthetic and how we present the assets on the website, but we are really trying to develop that sense of exploration and almost utility and access by the metaverse partnerships, as well as thinking about kind of that ultimately creating a familiar user experience, because one of the other things is that we actually attract kind of both sides of, I suppose, the aisle in terms of an audience base. So we have really kind of this crypto, this kind of crypto native base, as well as this kind of fashion forward base. And in terms of language, in terms of aesthetic, in terms of, kind of mutual circles, they are almost diametrically opposed. So for our perspective, to be able to kind of have those two in the balance, it's almost thinking, okay, what is the consistency of aesthetic? What is the consistency of experience? And how do we then kind of lower those barriers to entry to get both, on the platform in the first place?
Absolutely. And I think you've brought us to where we are now in a really great way. Great points. So considering the kind of current state of the arts, I always find that a little bit difficult when we're dealing with something like virtual fashion, as mentioned by almost all of our speakers. We are all like futurists here. We all look to what's next, especially the creatives in the room. And the designers in the space are always, as mentioned by Adriana and Amber, trying to build something better and more realistic and even beyond realistic. I think this idea of hyper reality and stuff you see only on metahumans and the coolest thing that I always bring up in these talks about the metaverse and about virtual fashion is the only limit is one's imagination. You can literally do anything, and Brian brought that up through the idea of like creativity. But anything is literally possible if you can imagine it, and obviously that can be manifested in virtual fashion. Nothing is impossible. The confines of reality is the way I frame it a lot, are removed. When we're considering what's going on right now, I think we're always trying to push forward. So, obviously I'd love to hear a little bit about what each of you are, considering right now. Maybe you want to mention something that you're activating during Fashion Week, but more so, I'd be really interested to hear from each of you, because I know the way that, brands like The Fabric and Materialize or Polygon think. The plans are for the next year, but, they're also, overarching goals that span, years, if not decades. It's general grander visions, and that's really what I think sets this space apart from most let's say entertainment or production or fashion companies. We kind of approach this from a tech company point of view and think of larger vision versus immediate deliverables. And I think that's one of the things that makes this space really powerful. So I'd love to hear from each of you, considering what you're working on now, and then going into a little bit of detail on how that can dictate the future of your brand and the space in general. And then also, if any of you have any thoughts you want to add to that on, considering where the space is right now. Maybe it's, thinking about Unreal Engine, or maybe it's thinking about on-chain storage, or, any way you want to really pull it. But if anybody has any thoughts about where this is going or what we might see in the future, I'd also be really interested in that. So to kick off that lofty set of questions, I would love to pass it to Amber. I would love to let the people listening right now know a little bit more about the Fabricant Studio and all the beautiful work that you're doing, building a co-creation environment with artists and designers and everyday people all over the world, and also how you're using that as a backbone to continue building out, some of the beautiful collaborations and designs that you and your designers continue to execute. But yeah, obviously you can speak on it way better than I can. So I'll pass it over to you, and would love to hear some thoughts on where you are now and where it's all going.
Yeah, thank you. You describe it actually pretty well. No, I think the thing is, at some point we realized that just making collections, it's not going to be scalable, and how are we going to address the entire metaverse on our own? And that's even thinking about these Web3 eulogies where you're like, we want to work together and we want to do this as not as having competitors, but actually working with everyone in space. That's sort of always been our notion, is how do we change this entire fashion industry the quickest and the best, and that's by doing that together. There's no way that we can do that on our own. And I think that's why we work with so many, companies, and also Dematerialize, but also, DressX. We try to really forge bonds between every single person in the space, because this is really how we build this industry together. And the change really needs to come from all of us. And all of us have all these different sort of islands, but we work together, and I think that is so different from, for instance, the traditional fashion industry, where everything is secretive, where nobody shares things with each other, where everything is like, oh, look at what is this person is doing, and oh my god, now we have to do this too, and it's just like this. And there's all this ways of being toxic even to the workers working in fashion companies, right, where you're being extorted. Like, if you're not productive or whatever, you have to stay late. Like, so many stories of people working so in such horrible conditions just for clothing. And that maybe sounds really crazy, but we're not saving lives with fashion, right? Like, why are so many people taking themselves so seriously? And to us, that was feeling like, we wanted to just put some fresh air into this industry and create something that is fun, something where we can have fun together, where we can build stuff together and actually create a better future, where we can create livelihood for people, where we can create new economic systems for people to create assets and earn money off it, and actually equalize everyone. So on our platform, you can basically pick a garment that you like by a fashion designer, a fashion brand, or anybody who wants to upload garments. Maybe even crypto communities. We of course have a collaboration coming up with World of Women, which we're super excited about. So it can be any type of garment you like, and then you can pick a fabric that is, for instance, a material that's designed by a crypto artist or another artist of fabric, traditional fashion fabric factories we've also had on the platform. And then when you put those two together, you create your unique design, which makes you become a fashion designer yourself, and we call those co-creators. So it's not us no longer deciding what things need to look like, but it's people taking ownership back of their identity and the way that they want to express themselves in this new world. So it's no longer a brand telling you, you should wear this because otherwise you're not cool. Like, no, you get to decide on what you want to wear and how you want to sell it and how you want to create it and share it with your friends and actually monetize off it, because all the people in this chain, so the garment creator, the material creator, and the co-creator, get equal split, in the revenue. So for us, that's really important, creating this leveling playing field between all of these entities. Like right now, we have these brands on top, which are deciding everything, and then it's just going to tug down. But we just think that even there's so much talent coming from the fashion schools, for instance, and a lot of big brands are actually copying these young designers. They just look at Instagram and then they just like copy that, without ever giving these young designers credit. And we are so sick of that. We want to create a better system for all of the people that work in fashion, and yeah, the studio is kind of the first exploration of how we can do that. But our plan is to revolutionize the entire fashion industry, and we want everybody to come along. So for us, the bigger we can go, the better, and the more things we can set up, the better. And this actually is also playing out in the fact that we have our own fashion label, which is going to work together with a lot of interesting artists, dressing people. So next to the studio, we also have our own expression of what we think digital fashion can be, and what if you use the technology, what it can really be to its fullest fruition. And then we have our academy, which is really educating people how to make digital fashion created. Twitch streams we have weekly where you can tune in and listen and see what we do. And then, of course, we have our community, which is the base of everything that we do. And in Decentraland Fashion Week, we now have a community fashion show, which is all the co-creators who created their digital fashion are able to walk on the catwalk, and they have a community store as well. So it's the first real decentralized fashion show, not created by one person, but by the whole community. So we're super proud of that.
Beautiful, beautiful. So excited for everybody to see everything that you've been working on. Hopefully people already had a chance to check out your beautiful installations this week. And of course, also, if you want to go downstairs and check it out, Amber also has a collaboration between the Fabricant and Krista Kim Studios in the Cash Labs gallery. So really, really excited to have you, and so happy to feature the Fabricant, of course, as part of Metaverse Fashion Week, because it wouldn't be Metaverse Fashion Week without the Fabricants. So happy to have you, Amber, and everybody, please let's co-create a better future for the fashion industry, because we can. And if you want to see why, I highly recommend just to plug it to go seek out. I'm sure there's a recording of it now. Our sustainability conversation as DressX threw in a whole bunch of statistics that I think back up everything that Amber said, and will allow us to create a more equitable, more sustainable future for the industry that is currently just is not any of those things. Let's put it. Let's be real. Passing it over to another fashion industry veteran who I'm sure can add some thoughts to that. Brian, would love to hear some thoughts from you. Obviously we've come from a place of tradition, and of course also everything from streetwear to luxury, in your background. But I think when we're considering where we're at now and where we're moving in the future, I would love to discuss what you and Polygon Studios are doing. I think that you're bringing up a lot of projects similar to the Fabricant. You're helping incubate a lot. You're helping, support, sustain, and helping hopefully dictate what the future of the space might look like. Through a whole bunch of different ventures that Polygon is involved with, from base camps to personal initiatives. So I'd love to pass the mic over to you, because obviously you can speak to it much better than I can, and just to let people know where your mind's at right now, and what you think is exciting in terms of where the space is going.
Yeah, thanks, David. I mean, being that premier onboarding engine for both, world-class legacy IP holders and those emerging designers who are now considering whether to take digital fashion and the metaverse seriously, being there for them, teach them best practice, consult, and basically play point guard to composability, right? Like distribute the ball, let them know who are the players who you need to be talking to. Because one could have a poor experience in trying to sort of get onboarded into Web3, maybe get some bad advice and end up in a bad place by some opportunistic people, because there are grifters in the business. So, that's something I definitely want to point out as one of the strengths and benefits of working with the Polygon Studios and building upon Polygon. Think about what Polygon represents. Each of the blue chip, I call them blue chip because they're the biggest and most well-known and well-represented and have the largest audiences. That's not to say other projects aren't as ambitious or as good. Metaverses or virtual worlds that comprise the metaverse, Decentraland being one, of course, are built upon Polygon rails. And as such, we feel this responsibility of making sure that interoperability and infrastructure is there. Right, and I think anyone who has spent even a little bit of time researching the subject knows that we're not there. So, working with those who are addressing this, the Metamundos of the world, working with Boson Protocol, who are developing an incredible pre-market sort of like options, price discovery, phygital product, which is just absolutely incredible. And I know that they're activating here in Decentraland's Metaverse Fashion Week as well. Basically getting these component parts in front of designers and brands and letting them know these are the sorts of tools that are at your disposal. This is what we mean by composability and culture Legos. This is how you build upon the Ethereum virtual machine. That is really important to us at Polygon, making sure that we put forth those values. And to strike on some of the things that Amber was saying, Amber, I co-signed everything you just previously said. That was an amazing soliloquy. I was just bopping my head as you were talking. But sort of erasing some of the terrible stains in fashion culturally. You were talking about how guarded some designers are and showrooms are, and it reminds me of some of my experiences being inside showrooms where you're making your selection as a retailer for the current season that you're purchasing to be in store within the next few months, and everyone is sort of like watching each other's movements, like hiding garments and like sort of moving their racks around so no one can see what they're buying. And it's sort of like the anti Web3 value system that was sort of crystallized into Ember, that people who came up through the traditional fashion system were taught and continue to sort of espouse. So I just wanted to co-sign everything you said because it was incredible, and point my own experiences. Erasing that, sort of finding a better tomorrow. Definitely important.
That's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. And I just want to mention one thing that you said because I'm obsessed with it now. I'm gonna quote you on that. Cultural Legos. Love that idea, and I think that's excellent. And hopefully we can create more robust and facilitated building blocks for more creatives. Snaps. I love that.
David, I would be remiss if I didn't give proper credit to that phrase. Trevor McFedries from Brud had used that phrase once before. I gave him a shout out on Twitter for it, and it has stuck forever. And it's something that I'm trying to make sure I push forward as well in talking about composability on the Ethereum virtual machine. So shout out to Trevor.
Love that, and love that you gave credit as well, Fairy Web3. Last but certainly not least,
you can't. Yeah, I can't take credit.
Cite your sources.
Now, like I said, this is my first time ever experiencing a digital fashion week. I mean, I've done trade shows that have been done online because of the pandemic, and since everything was shut down, they found a way to bring it online so that way you can still communicate with the rest of the industry. So this is the first time I've done a digital fashion week though, because that's different than the trade shows. So to experience that was definitely unique. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about it. It's always nice attending these events in person and being able to interact with other people, but I will say, being on the other end of things, if you're putting together a fashion show, to not have to sit there and dress models, deal with setup of the set and all that stuff, that must have been nice. But I don't know how much work as far as the technology they had to actually put into this, because I'm sure it took time to actually put that together in the metaverse to be able to showcase a full fashion show digitally. Now the panels, that should be a lot easier, because it looks like a lot of the panels, they just inserted videos into the metaverse, kind of like you guys watching me right now, but then I just added to the metaverse type of thing. So the panels, understandable, that seems easy, but the whole fashion show, I don't know how much work it's taking to put into putting these digital fashion shows together. It might actually be easier to do it in person, but because we're going into the digital world and everything's becoming digital, I mean, I guess it's something we'll have to learn to get used to, and I'm sure over time it'll get a lot easier. That was also actually my first time in like this whole metaverse thing. I've read up on it, trying to come up with creative ideas of how it might work for me, but I had never actually tried it. So I did try it, I had to create an avatar and all that stuff, which was different. And it took me a minute to navigate, because they would tell you where to go to for these shows, but then some of them were like on different floors. You had to figure out exactly which building. I was a little confused in the beginning, but then I got the hang of it. And it was a unique experience. It's definitely going to take time to get used to that though. I still feel like right now, if they're going to do digital fashion weeks, I still need the in-person experience as well. And then maybe over time, we'll just get used to having digital, so you won't need the in-person, but I don't see in-person going away anytime soon. But if you guys haven't joined the metaverse and got to try that out, I definitely recommend checking it out. There's other live events that they do on there, so you guys can try other things too. But I will warn you, it does feel like you're playing a video game. So that's it for this week's Trending Tuesday. I just wanted to show you guys the Metaverse Fashion Week, because that's where everything's trending right now. Thank you for watching.